behind the scenes, we have a couple of things that are happening. One, we have Amy and Gabby who are available to you. If you have any questions, please, by all means, reach out to us into the chat window. We would appreciate if you would reach out to us during this session. Yeah, some housekeeping things. Definitely want to make sure that you have a pen during our session. And I would highly recommend that you get ready to start taking a few notes during our time together. Now, at the end of the session, at the end of today's webinar, as always, we're giving away a few freebies. Paolo, you leader, you'll also get a few freebies as well.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. I would love to know in the chat window, where are you joining us from? We have gone live on LinkedIn, we've gone live on YouTube, and also on our website. So in the chat window, love to know where you're joining us from. Where are you joining us from today? Go ahead, type into the chat window, what part of the world are you joining us from? Paolo, where are you joining us from?
I'm joining you from Italy, from a small city 100 kilometers south of Milan.
Yeah, and I have been there a few times myself. Yeah, in Reggio Emilia. Very good. Now, we have Nicola Bryant is joining us from Hamilton in Ontario in Canada. Great to have you with us. We have Annapolis, Sail Capital. Yeah, Sailing Capital, Annapolis in MD. Where's MD, Paolo? In USA. Where would MD be? I have no clue. Maryland. Maryland. Yes, very good. I also say, yes, I see we have a few hands up from Mark Banfield. Where are you joining me from, Mr. Mark Banfield? In Milano as well. Great to have you on board. Hey, Lionel, great to have you with us. Mark Humphreys, great to have you with us. Martin Smith, great to have you with us. Jimmy Wan, great. Hey, you Smithson, very good to have you with us. I know you're all very shy, but good to have you with us. Mr. Gambini, thanks for telling us where you are. Just tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Well, I'm an electronics engineer by education and a former Army officer. I spent most of my career in technology with technical roles at the beginning, and for the last 20 years I've been in sales in telecoms. I spent 6 years setting up and running my own company. As an entrepreneur, I failed, actually. You told me not to use failure as a word, but I did not succeed, which means I failed. But this is the experience. This is the experience I'm most proud of, paradoxically. And now I'm back as an employee. I'm heading the enterprise sales team for Rayon, that is a telecom provider, actually the #1 largest internet backbone.
Okay, well, congratulations. And well, when I invited you, I'm glad you didn't object to me inviting you to this. What was your initial impression when I invited you to come along and talk about handling objections?
Sorry, what was my reaction?
Yeah.
Well, I was flattered, and I thought, well, I don't have anything to say, so maybe I shouldn't really be joining the webinar.
I'm glad you didn't object. And one thing, when we did come together, myself, yourself, and the team, we talked about the way in which we see objection handling. And you raised a few things. And what I've said here is we talked about presence first. And the black area and the topics that we're going to talk about is presence. But you raised know your triggers. So we'll talk about that when we get into presence. Yeah. And then I talked about preparation. You talked about anticipation. And I said, well, we're going to need a map for that and some kind of a plan. And then after that, the process. And we got into a little bit of talking about influence and manipulation. And so we have an aligned view in the way in which we had come about this actual webinar together. When we initially started talking about objections, I said we got to get a definition for objection, and then this is the Oxford definition: an expression or feeling of disapproval or opposition. So we're getting opposites. And then a reason for disagreeing: they have raised no objection to the latest plans. That would be no objections. But Paolo, I asked you a question. What objections do you get? And I'd love to know from others. Please type in the chat window. What are the objections that you are getting? I'd love to know your objection. But Paolo, talk to me when we talk about objections, both on a professional, personal, what springs to mind for you?
Well, I get plenty of objections. I get objections from customers, of course, because I'm heading a sales team. So that's the job that we do, is to manage objections from customers and convince them to buy from us. I get internal objections from my organization that objects to the objections of the customers. So we are in between. I'm sitting in between objections. I've got also objection from my own team, inevitably.
Yeah.
And finally, I'm married and I'm father of 2 teenage girls, so I'm surrounded by objections.
And we were also saying,
like everybody else, I imagine.
Yeah, I think that the objections, from a point of view of objections, we're even getting objections from our dog. But the objections set a trigger inside us. And it's something that you and I were talking about a lot, and that is what happens inside when you get an objection. What's your initial, or from another perspective, what's the other person, what's happening in them? And what were your observations in that area from others and inside you? Well,
objections are difficult to handle because a synonym of objections could be rejection, could be critique, could be fight. So all of this, if you rephrase objections, if you paraphrase objections into these terms, then you quickly see how an objection can trigger some strong emotional response about self-esteem, about self-worth, about being good enough or not being good enough, about not being able to achieve what you want. So an objection can trigger an uncontrolled emotional response. Emotional responses tend to be uncontrollable, but you have to be aware of what's happening inside your own system in order to manage successfully, to react in an efficient way, in an effective way to an objection.
Yeah, I shared this with you the last time, and this symbol, Chinese kanji, it's a meaning listen with your whole self, not just with your ears. A very good friend of mine said, listen to understand. So if we're listening to just hear, we're not listening. If we listen with our eyes to see, undivided attention to stay focused, and then with our heart for the feelings that are being triggered inside us, but above all with the mind. Now, I asked you about the mind the last time because we have the logical and emotional sides of our brain, but you had mentioned that a lot of people tend to, and I would say this, I've observed myself in past negotiations or past objections, whereby I go fight, flight, or freeze syndrome within that. So I go inside what's the amygdala. Well, what can we do to prepare ourselves in that event?
Well, what you can do is to a couple of things, I would say, at least as far as I'm concerned. Before getting into a meeting, at least you can plan. When there is a scheduled meeting, you can plan for it. So I normally use a piece of paper. I write down a few things, and I try, of course, to prepare a plan, a strategy for the interaction, what the objectives are, what type of compromise we could accept, what the likely objections are. So I prepare about the technicalities, about the actual content. of the negotiation, but I also prepare about the relationship component of the relationship. And the relationship has got two sides: myself, and the counterpart. Understanding who the counterpart is, whether it's a junior person or is more senior, whether you know this person already or don't. You can make some assumption, or you can make some, like, for example, a more senior person may be a tougher negotiator, but such a person may be in charge, may be authority, and may feel confident about making decision on the spot. So it may be actually easier to get this person to accept creative solutions than in a scenario where you deal with a junior person that is more concerned about his role, and therefore may be more reluctant to accept something that is not standard and would lean towards something that complies with the rule book that this person has got. So they have to tick the box. These are two different examples where you need to behave differently. On my side of the relationship, what I try to remind myself is who I am. That is, what are my emotional triggers? I try to be self-aware, to do some mindfulness, if you will, and be aware of what type of emotions this type of interaction may actually generate. As I mentioned, if you cannot acknowledge the emotions that drive you, it's very difficult to do what this slide suggests. That is to hear with your entire being. Because once you feel threatened, despised, when you are in anger or in fear or in disgust or whatever, then your reaction will not necessarily be as efficient as it needs to be to drive the conversation and the relationship in a constructive way.
So we might end up going into an encounter. Paolo just mentioned about our plan, and we get triggered. And what happens to this presence, which at this moment you can see this person in front of you has a presence and an air of confidence about them. But they go into, and we know that the situation starts to boil up. So Paolo, what happens when I boil carrots?
It softens up.
So so we're going into a heated discussion. We know it's happened, and our presence starts to be affected by the heat. We might soften up. And of course, what happens when I boil an egg?
It gets hard.
It gets hard. Yes, it gets hard. So the encounter with the other person could harden, our relationship could harden, or you and I love some coffee. We know that when we boil coffee, there's a nice taste and a lasting aroma. So it depends on the encounter that we're going into and how we might be triggered or trigger the other person. One of the areas that's vital to these encounters is our presence. And myself and Paolo talked about this recently about the alignment. This research conducted by McCrabian in 1967 says 7% of the words you say are believed by the audience. 38% of the vocals pitch are believed by the audience. So that is 45%. And then the 55% is your body language. And people always say to me, well, Paul, I just have to look good. And the answer is no. Because when you're getting into a heated event, a discussion, an objection, a tough question, your message must be aligned. The words, the way you say those words and your body language, it must be congruent and aligned because it will be affected. What were your thoughts when we talked about this the last time, Paolo?
Yeah, what we discussed about this slide is the fact that very often this type of techniques or recommendations are really proposed as such. Make sure that your body language is consistent with the content of your words. But this is not something that you can really master. That is, you can have consistency between the verbal content, the paraverbal, so the vocal component, the tone, the pitching, etc., and especially your body language, the expression, the movement of your body, only if you really feel what you're saying. So when you suggest somebody to listen, rephrase, calm down, and suggest an alternative to the objector, it only works if you're really aware of what's going on inside your body, and if your communication is really consistent, is really heartfelt. Otherwise, what happens is that your words say something, mean something, but the 90% of the remaining communication says the opposite. So what happens is you convey a feeling of inconsistency. It may feel like you're trying to act up or to manipulate your counterpart.
Agreed. So, no, I agree. This is all about when we put this together, and you're looking at this chart, which has been referenced thousands of times today alone, possibly around the world. It's about your message being aligned and congruent with your body language. This is your presence, the words, the way you say those words in your body language. The fact is that every smile, every frown, every syllable you utter, every arbitrary choice of word that passes between your lips can draw people towards you or make them run away or want to run away from you. And this is critical. And so the words that you use, and at the end of the webinar today, I'm going to be sharing with you corporate phraseology, words to avoid and use in the corporate environment. The pace, the punch, the pause, and the prosody, they must be aligned. And that tonality, what you say, can change the impact. The key to fast-paced delivery, the key is that when you are getting an objection from another person, is that you attempt to listen to the words and the pace at which they are delivering their objection to you and slow it down. Because if you speed it up, you'll create anxiety in them. If you slow it down, you'll calm the situation down. So pace is critical, but the pause is probably the most important part of your actual vocal delivery. So you got to watch your words, and the vocals need to be slower. Now, we're not talking, Paolo mentioned manipulation. If you start mirroring people, that is manipulative. And if you go in here attempting to have techniques that you think are going to work and you're practicing these techniques on another person, that will cause you no end of problems. Definitely, I remember one former boss of mine, when he presented, he just looked at one person throughout the whole of the presentation. And I felt at the time, this person picked on me, I was being drilled out of it. And it was an amazing sense, bad for me. Everybody was wondering, what's going on here? Well, one, the stare, you can't read it. It causes anxiety. You start to tell yourself stories. You start to doubt yourself. And this really, anything is better than no expression. So you've got to be engaging with them, minding your tone and your facial expressions. I do like this one. It's very approachable. It's called the NxtGEN smile. The smile, as Victor Borg once said, is the shortest distance between two people. The smile. Now, you're going to get an objection. I'm not calling about smiling throughout the whole lot of it. It's better than staring them out of it. And so a warm smile, and speak as if you're speaking to an old friend, and that will lower down your anxiety. One key thing is hand gestures. Hand gestures are critical. They must be open hand gestures. We know that close like this is defensive, or putting your hands up like this, hold on. You can do this virtually. Closed gesturing is going to cause you a problem unless you're smiling. Paolo, presence. During the encounter, the triggers have gone. You're in a fight, flight, and freeze syndrome. We just talked about the words, where you say those words, and our body language. What have you observed?
Well, what I can tell you is a relevant experience that I had a few days ago with a customer that we've been negotiating with for 7-8 months. We've been negotiating the contract. It's a very complex one, and we got down to 2 open sticking points still. So we had a meeting with 2 people that had never met before. Okay. And as we started the meeting, one of the 2 persons was quite cooperative, and we managed to address the first item. When we got to the last one, the second person that I thought I had understood from email exchange that was more friendly towards us, revealed actually to be the opposite. It was very aggressive and started saying things like that we are not serious, that we don't take our commitment seriously. That's the first time that this thing that had not happened has happened to him in the last 20 years. So, and I felt attacked. And I felt that he was saying things that were obviously false. So instead of pausing, thinking, rephrasing, isolating the concept, what I did was I tried to stop him from saying things that I thought were false, because I didn't want to create a reality of falsehood around our company. But so I defended our position, the standing of the company. I referred to existing customers. But what I did in reality there was to get into a symmetrical escalation. He was saying black, and I was saying, no, it's white. And he was saying, no, it's black. So that type of interaction, the symmetrical escalation of communication, where you try to force your truth upon the other person, is not a good way to handle objections. Yeah. Eventually, I realized it, and I shut up. This person went on saying one thing that then shed light, a different light onto the conversation. It was, I don't see why I should risk my job for your company. And that for me was an enlightenment, because it moved the focus from us, not my company, not being good enough, professional, serious, to I'm afraid of losing my job because I don't trust you. So the subject of, at least for me, the challenge was how to address this personal concern. That is, well, I mean, it's emotional, much more than translated to professional impact. Yeah, there's deeper. There's a technique in the military. The Marines, U.S. Marines use. It's called the bluff methodology. Bottom line up front. He was bluff. Bottom line up front. He was hardly going to tell you, or she was hardly going to tell you, I fear being new in the job that by working or delivering or doing anything with yourselves is going to impact my job. And so there is 4 levels of a relationship. 1, we get to know them. You thought you knew them, and you thought that you knew them as in your corner, or what we call the green flag, a good relationship. You like them, become advocates. They have engaged with you and advocated for you and for the company, and then there was a level of trust. I find that advocate, and trust, it all comes down to the way in which we talk to other people and talk to them. It's that building blocks. I get to know the brand. I get to like the brand. I get to know the team. I get to like the team. I become advocates for that team or process. And then after that, we trust them. And we mentioned about preparation. So we looked at preparation being an area, beginning with the end in mind, is a classic
habit number 2 of the 7 habits of highly effective people. So I talked about an anticipation map. You mentioned about anticipation. You mentioned just getting a piece of paper out. You recommended that being mindful or doing some kind of mindful techniques before. Could you share with us what you do before I map out these 3 areas? Because I reckon that this anticipation map, which we have, which is designed and originally comes from iSpeak's curriculum, marries in very well what you're already doing instinctively.
Well, as I mentioned, in general, the starting point is the actual content, the technical part of the negotiation or objection management. So I write down what I want to achieve and what type of compromise we can accept and what type of objections we may expect. Then what I do is, as far as mindfulness is concerned or self-awareness is concerned, I could, depending on the time, I don't do the same thing all the time, of course, but I may spend some time breathing deeply. I may write down a couple of thoughts on a piece of paper. I find that to me, it's quite helpful to write down thoughts and emotions on paper. It gives you a degree of separation, and you become more aware of what's going on in your.
Agreed. I agree. Yeah.
And if you know the person that you're going to interact with, you may also know already what type of emotional trigger this person may actually activate.
Absolutely.
So there is some individuals who may look or remind you of your dad. If you had a bad experience with your dad, that's something that you may want to be aware of.
Yeah.
And just as an example, of course. And so these are the 2 main things. And then, of course, if you know who you're going to talk to, you may also try to get into their shoes and try and see what things from their perspective, so that you can come up with a better compromise.
Yeah. You're not doing things that are too dissimilar to what is recommended. First of all, who are you speaking to? There's a difference between speaking to somebody that's a novice and somebody that's an expert for many different reasons from a decision-making process. But I also would recommend that you look at green flags, red flags, and gray flags. Green flags are you've got a nurtured relationship. You know them, you like them, they've advocated for you to pass, and they've supported and trusted you in different areas. So it's a green flag. A red flag is you don't know them. You can't like them because you don't know them. They've never advocated, and you don't know whether you trust them or not. And so you don't even know them. These green, reds, and then gray flag is it's unsure. You know them. You don't know whether there's like and rapport built between them, and there's no signals of trust. Green, red, and gray flags within the who component are classic ways to map the organization or the meeting attendees. Then after that, why are they there? The first one, you're stepping inside their shoes. The second one, are you there to inform and impart information? Because that's a logical delivery. A logical delivery, a QBR, quarterly business review, or updates on a project. Or maybe you're there to persuade them. Alignment, increases of money, decisions, persuasive. The 2 differences of delivery is that logical is slower than persuasive. On the whole, when we're delivering information, policies, procedures, structures, updates, it could be a project update, that's data that you're giving that's typically delivered slower than and then persuasive is delivered extra fast. Excellent. Now, then there's a point. What is the primary point you're there? So I highly recommend that you write down who, why are they there, and what's the point. Be as specific as you can. What are the key learnings or the key actions you want them to take? What are the requests? Above all, what's the ask? What's the next step? What's the ask? We'd love to know if you have any questions so far in the chat window. Me and Paolo are open to your questions. I do see a few more have joined us. Really great. And I've watched the streaming is going well on LinkedIn. We appreciate you joining us also on LinkedIn as well. So what are any questions? Please stick them in the chat window. The Q&A session is open. Paolo, I know that you can't join us next week, but we have an in-person program for all our Irish listeners. I know the people in Canada, you'll have to fly over. You probably have to leave today. And we have our Presenting for Success session is coming up on the 31st of May. And everybody, you're very welcome to join us here in Dublin for a full day of Presenting for Success with Ilaria Dondero, and the rest of our team will see you there. If you're able to join us, it'd be great to have you with us. I see, Paolo, when we're talking about the structured, and we talk about, first of all, getting your presence ready. So we have our presence and alignment of presence. Then we have, after that, we've got to understand the way in which the overall body language that we have is structured. So how body language is impacted. And then we need a plan of some sort to begin with the end in mind. Now, if we're entering into the art of war, and this is where our triggers may be tipped over, and we might tip into a new balance. We need a process of some form, because we're going to have differences of opinions. And what's the difference between influence and manipulation? Paolo?
Well, manipulation is when you try to convince somebody to do something against their interest.
Yeah.
Influence doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation. Influence is, if used for good, is a way to try and find a compromise that is good for you, a solution or compromise that is good for you and is good for the counterpart, to the best of your knowledge, of course. So, and influence is also more about to show your counterpart things under a different light, from a different perspective. Agreed. While manipulation is definitely a very different exercise of hiding the reality, or hiding some part of the reality to convince somebody to do something against their own interest.
Yeah. What manipulation is like, it's a short-term win. If you have lightsabers, we're in Star Wars, it's not so good. It's the dark side of influence. It's short-term gain. It affects our brain in a very different way than influence, because influence, which something that myself and Paolo talked about before from Robert Cialdini's point of view, influence is the power of persuasion. It's a psychology of persuasion. And to persuade others and to influence others, we talk about Cialdini. Paolo, when you had mentioned a couple of these techniques the last time, tell us a little bit more about your insights into influence and persuasion of other people.
Well, Cialdini is a psychologist and has done a lot of field research. So he identified a number of techniques or ways to communicate that help, let's say, persuade people. And a very basic one is reciprocity. If you do something for somebody else, somebody else would tend to reciprocate. That's part of the hardwiring of human brains. There is no way around it. We are also very sensitive to authority. So when it's somebody that you acknowledge to be authoritative, that make a statement or guarantees for you or makes a promise, then we tend, being gregarious, we tend to listen to the boss, to the chief.
Yes. Yes. That hierarchy will be influenced by authority, correct?
Exactly. And then you've got things such as social proof. I mean, if
everybody's doing it, we should be doing it too. Yeah.
Yeah, because eventually fear, among the 6 basic emotions of human beings, fear is the most powerful one. Okay, it's the one that triggers the amygdala, etc. So when we find ourselves in front of something that is new, the first question that our amygdala asks itself is this new thing going to kill me? Okay,
Yeah.
that's the very basic question that our brain keeps asking itself. And if everybody else has gone for this thing, then this thing is not a threat for me. Therefore, I can go for it. So we tend to be, again, gregarious, and we do whatever everybody else does.
Yeah.
And we also are sensitive to another very basic instinct, is scarcity. If something, and this is why Booking.com, for example, when you go and look for a room, it keeps telling you there are only 3 rooms like this left, 1 room left. We are very
triggered.
If something is scarce, we are afraid of losing the possibility and of starving.
Yeah, it'd be, if it's like the Christmas presents, they're running out. It could be a PlayStation, it could be an Xbox, it could be the latest toy, and all of a sudden they've emptied off the shelves, and they hold back the supply just before Christmas week, and then flood the market again. Now, they're all influential techniques.
Yeah, and they are influential because they talk to the unconscious brain, to psychological mechanisms that are hardwired in our unconscious brain, and therefore we tend not to be very much aware. When we get triggered there, we are not really that aware of what's happening, and so we can be influenced, or we can influence other people. The same goes for other techniques or situation like fear of loss. Human beings are afraid of losing something. We are much more concerned about losing something that we've got already than to gain something. So when you negotiate, if you can if you can focus on the fact that there is a loss to be made if we don't find an agreement, rather than gaining something, the loss message is much more powerful because it talks to our unconscious brain. Now, all these mechanisms can be used for good or for bad. So, you can master them. You can, the more you practice, the better you become. But again, self-awareness, being aware of what happened in your brain is as important as to try and manipulate somebody else's brain.
Yeah, I just wondered, so one of the main areas within influence has to be empathy, and to step inside somebody's shoes, to understand their point of view. It goes all the way back to the start when we talked about at the start that if you're able to listen to understand, if you're able to listen with your whole body and not just with your ears, then empathy has to be the number one skill. Empathizing with people. And one of the areas of empathize, so this here is a technique to defuse. This is a process. Now, if you step into the process to say, I want to empathize to understand that other person, and then I want to transition. Transition is important because there's a key word within transition that we have to avoid, and then we need a structured response. So we have empathize, transition, and then respond to this aggressive objection. And what do we mean by empathize? How would you empathize with somebody? Paolo, what words would you say? Here's an example of some. What would you use to empathize with another person?
Understand.
Yeah.
I can see.
Yeah. I can see your point of view. I appreciate where you're coming from. I don't blame you feeling that way.
I wouldn't use blame, because for the unconscious brain, the negative does not exist. So the word that sticks is blame. I may have blamed you. I'm not blaming you because I'm a good person. Thank you.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that. No.
No, probably. So these are words that have a meaning. However, make them your own. The key is to use the word because. Because builds a positive bridge between you and them. It builds a positive bridge between you and them. The word because is a very powerful word to use. I appreciate and understand your point of view because if I was in your same position, I'd feel the same way too. Avoid in your transition. So first of all, you've empathized. When you transition, avoid saying the word but. Okay? A really important one. And I don't know whether you notice, it's habitually ingrained in us for us to say this word. Paul, I appreciate and understand your point of view because if I was in the same position, I'd feel the same way too. But, and the minute you say that, it's the great eraser. One of our instructors here and fellow colleague and friend of mine, Ilaria Dondero, says, but is the great eraser. It erases everything you've said beforehand, and you're just starting off blank. It's a negative bridge between you and them. You've got to be mindful of that. Did you know that, Paolo? But is the great eraser?
Yeah, but I didn't know about because. Because is a key takeaway for me today.
Well, let me tell you, when you are flying into Dublin to see me, or I'm flying and I come over to Milano, just before you're to get to the gate, if you're running in any way late through security, use this word. And this is proven in research. It's proven that 67% of the time, people will say, you may go ahead. I'm wondering if I could go ahead because I'm running late from my plane. Would it be okay if I go ahead because I'm running late from it? And everybody, 67, not everybody, 67%. Now, the other 33% are probably as late as you are. And they say, no, you can't get to the back. Or they just don't like people skipping queues. And this is a key takeaway for a lot of people. Watch and scratch your butt. Now, this is a complaint. Your response when you are looking at it, then let me explain why. Let me show you what that means, and then give a structured response. Empathize, transition, and respond. Well, we're coming to the end of our webinar. One of the main things I do want to leave you with is a technique that William Ury, the author, one of the two authors of Getting to Yes, go to the balcony. One of the main things that you've got to do in your presence, while present and mindful of the situation, is that you must go to the balcony. You've got to watch as if it's the theater and a play and everything's going on around you. There might be other parties having conversations. There might be disagreements if there's more than one in the room. You've got to go to the balcony. Or with an email. We highly recommend that before the go to the balcony technique means you write your email, you draft your email, you put down all your words, you use, you empathize, transition, no but, and then respond in your email structure, give a good response to the situation, park it, put it in drafts, go and have a coffee, go and relax, take it easy, and then cool down and come back to your email. Remember, don't just send the email, because if you send the email in anger, this is William Ury quotes Ambrose Bierce, when in anger, you'll give the best speech you'll ever regret, or the best email. You'll deliver the best email you ever regret. You've got to be careful. Put it in the drafts area and go to the balcony. Paolo, in Italy, there's balconies everywhere. Don't forget to go to the balcony. We were looking at the areas and Bing, let's have a chat about GBT. Paolo, we went and we looked at the areas of, I wanted to understand the techniques that were referenced by Bing in ChatGPT, and you did the same. And they gave these techniques a pause for a moment and be careful. Then clarify the question, so that you can acknowledge and repeat the question. Isolate the objection, very good. Then they say slow them down, show them the value, reframing, and then confirm the objection. So this is a 7-stage technique. And they even gave us a way to say it, which I was really impressed with, but you weren't. What does all this mean? Hey, Paolo, all of these techniques and everything we've talked about, what do they all signal? What do they all mean? And what are your recommendations?
Well, listening to the last slides, Paul, what came to mind is the sentence that was written on the Delphi's Temple of Apollo in Greece. That is, know yourself. That was also the sentence that Socrates, the philosopher, became famous for. This before, if you want to master any technique, if you want to influence somebody else, you'd better start with mastering yourself and knowing yourself. Otherwise, everything else will simply not work. If you go back to empathize, okay, if you want to empathize, and if I think about the interaction that I mentioned earlier on, I had with this customer a few days ago, when I felt attacked, I felt threatened, I was afraid that the deal would fall apart. These emotions of mine, and I thought that this guy was lying, that was not being fair. It was very difficult for me to empathize with him because my emotions were powerful and they were all negative. And to move away from this negative status of conflict, to be able to go to the balcony, take a step back, realize what's going on, look at the situation, breathe deeply, and change your perspective and your mood. Takes a lot of self-awareness. And actually, I couldn't do it. Immediately, I got into a fight, even if now I'm part of this webinar as if I knew anything about this. In reality, when it was an interaction, I got into an escalation, I got into a fight. I was lucky or that eventually managed to step out and eventually the conversation had a positive outcome. But it's in theory, everything is very clear and very easy. In practice, emotions are very powerful. So, and they drive us. So know yourself could be a good.
I love that. Know yourself. We know with all of these techniques, if you enter into an encounter prepared, understanding your presence, being aware, self-aware, and wanting to understand the other person, all you've got to do and say in your own mind is wait. The acronym is wait. Why am I talking? Wait. If you are talking and you're not understanding the other person, you've got to wait. You've got to hear them and understand what is it. Like Paolo was saying, something. There's a technique called QBQ, question behind the question. When it's an objection, QBO, question behind the objection. Try and dig deeper with empathy. Try your hardest to step inside their shoes, to be more empathetic, to understand them with your whole being. Well, we have come to the end of our webinar. Wow, Paolo, thank you so much. I'm just looking at the streams on the other side, and you will see this later when you log into LinkedIn. And it is my absolute pleasure to, one, thank you for not objecting, Paolo, not objecting to be on today's session. We talked about presence. I believe what Paolo was talking about was you got to know your triggers. You got to know the triggers that impact you and affect you. After that, you have to have a plan of some way, shape, or form. I gave you some techniques. Who are they? Why are they there? And what's your point? We highly recommend that you get prepared for this. Anticipation map can be writing things down, writing your thoughts down. Even some of the questions you might be expecting from them, that would definitely support you. Getting some of those questions out. What kind of emotions are you feeling? I highly recommend you write it down. Take it out of your head and write it down. Pause. I mentioned pausing. You've got to pause. 1, beforehand. 2, 3. Take yourself back and pause. And then lastly, we gave you a technique that should, when used properly, influence those. Remember, if you are present with them and you want to understand them, then definitely you will influence them. I do see the acronym WAIT. You are very welcome. QBQ or QBO. Yes, you're welcome, Jo Smithson. Very good. Yes, you're welcome. So what's next? Well, I would love for you in the chat window. Please tell us in the chat window, what's the one action you're going to take? What is the one action you're going to take away from our webinar? Please put it in the chat window right now. Paolo, while they are doing that, just before I give them the free book, what's the one action you will take?
Well, the idea of the because as a bridge to create a connection and show empathy, I think is a very good one. And also I like the WAIT acronym.
Yeah, I love it.
Always overlooked.
Use the word because. Yes, Jo Smithson is the same. They feel the same as you do, Paolo. We've got to use those. However, there's a couple of things. By the way, however, is a polite but. You may use the following link. Paolo, I'll send you the book.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. This ebook was created by Ilaria Dondero. It was created also by Gabby Widurick, part of our team, and it's research conducted by iSpeak as well as Harvard. Please now, you may go ahead and take that and download that book with using the QR code, and it will give you the corporate phraseology to use and avoid, words to watch when you are communicating. Words like try. Our next webinar will be streamed live again on Friday, the 30th of June, and from 1 to 2 Irish Standard Time. It's called Corporate Data Telling. It's all about putting data and giving it some soul. You're very welcome to join us. If you want to know more about our free information, our free academy, you go to the NxtGEN Academy. You may download some more of our resources and go to this free self-paced learning curriculum. And you can upload a live recording of yourself, and I'll put it through our AI, artificial intelligence platform, to give you some coaching feedback for free. You are very welcome. You may go ahead and do that as well. Paolo, I have a question.
Again.
Do you know where this is?
I think so, yes.
Well, somewhere down here, there is a tree.
Absolutely. If it has not been taken away by the flood, should
it's
still be
better
there.
not have. I encourage you.
I will check this weekend. I will check.
And I have no objections to you checking. Thank you, Paolo, for joining us. I appreciate your friendship. I appreciate your time, and I love your company. God bless. Take care, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Paolo. Thanks, everybody. You are very welcome. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We appreciate your time. All the best. Have a good one. We'll see you very soon at our next webinar. All the best. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.